Now, guys, it is the official off-season mega breakdown time where I go through different schedules, I break down rosters. We're going to kick it off here with Ohio State, who will most certainly be a preseason top 5 team. The initial analytics actually suggest Ohio State, even without CJ Stroud, they're going to be a top 3 or a top 2 team. They're ranked second according to ESPN's preseason analytical model. But we're going to give everyone a full breakdown on the schedule. How does it line up? Where are the tough games? And then I'm going to go position by position for Ohio State. How good do I expect their defense to be? How good do I expect their offense to be for 2023? So we're going to kind of cut it in half and take a look at the first half of the schedule. Of course, you've got the spring game, April 15th, which should be pretty much meaningless. Ohio State and really teams don't really tackle in it and stuff like that. But we will get to see McCord and Devin Brown, who I think McCord right now is clearly leading the job with the extra year of experience, and also Devin Brown changing his number to 33. A lot of Ohio State fans a little bit irked about that, so he's kind of fallen down a little bit because of it. And I would say McCord, the clear favorite for the quarterback job. And I also would say Devin Brown will stay. So Ohio State's going to have tremendous depth this season. If McCord wins the job and Devin Brown remains as the backup, that's a third-year guy and a second-year guy. That's 2 top 40 recruits with experience. Great quarterback depth this year if Devin Brown loses the job and stays. Now, if Devin Brown wins the job, we would expect McCord to immediately enter the transfer portal, and then you would have an issue in terms of QB depth. But I think the best quarterback should win it. Let's get right into the schedule. They open kind of a weird game at Indiana. If you guys remember, about 4 or 5 years ago, Ohio State opened at Indiana, but it was a Thursday night game. I think that was like 2017. Now they're at Indiana opening weekend on Saturday. I don't know. This might be the big noon game. This might be a 3:30 ABC game, but it should be, very easy for Ohio State. Indiana has been one of the worst teams in the Big Ten outside of the fluke pandemic year. The Ohio State's going to be around 28-point favorites, and it'll be a nice game for McCord or Devin Brown, whoever it ends up being. Let them get their feet wet. Let them have some connections with Ibuka, with Marvin Harrison Jr. It'll be a nice, easy game. And then, of course, it only gets easier. You get Youngstown State. That game's got noon on BTN written all over it. That'll be 73-0. Ohio State facing an FCS school, Jim Tressel's school. I think he retired as president from there. But yeah, that'll be a complete blowout. And then kind of an interesting game, Western Kentucky, another easy win at home. Western Kentucky, a very pass-happy team. Maybe they will test Ohio State secondary, but the Buckeyes very likely to be around 38, 40-point favorites in that one. Getting to the first tough game, Ohio State will be 3-0. Going into the Notre Dame game, and I can guarantee everyone right now, this game will be 7:30 on NBC, 1,000%. Sam Hartman, Notre Dame, Marcus Freeman. I've got so much respect, and I think he's the perfect head coach, younger guy to build Notre Dame. It's going to be a very hard game for Ohio State, and it's going to be Ohio State's first-year starting quarterback's first big test, whether that is McCord or Brown, going on the road to Notre Dame. Right now, we got a preseason line, Ohio State, a kind of a weird line, 8-point favorites over Notre Dame on the road in a primetime spot. So I would say Ohio State's going to be a top 3 team going into this game. In terms of the AP poll, I would say Notre Dame is probably going to be a top 10 team. This is a huge early season matchup, and the Buckeyes actually get a really early bye week last weekend of September after this game, and then they get an easy one versus Maryland, although Maryland should be decent with Tagovailoa returning for them, I believe. So it'll be an easy win against Maryland, but just taking a look at those first 5 games, minimum Ohio State will be 4-1, but the hope is you're able to win on the road in Notre Dame. You're getting your young quarterback experience. Hopefully you have an elite pass rush with JTT, with Jack Sawyer, with Michael Hall. You know, that's the hope. And really, I think the defense, there's no excuse for the defense to be anything but top 5. Let's just go through the list. CJ Hicks, Sonny Styles, Jack Sawyer, JTT, Denzel Burke bounce back year, right? Michael Hall, Tyleik Williams. It's player after player. There's no excuse for the defense. They need to be really good. Tommy Eichenberg returning, right? So I would expect Ohio State minimum 4-1, but hopefully 5-0 going into the second half of the season. So at Purdue, of course, everyone's going to talk about that game, right? Ohio State struggles in West Lafayette. Just looking at the Purdue roster outlook right now, they kind of got destroyed last year. They lost their head coach. They lost their quarterback. But they are getting Hudson Card. I'm sure a lot of people familiar with him, the transfer quarterback from Texas who got beat up by Quinn Ewers, but he is a solid player. So I think the hope with that Purdue game, you want to avoid the night game. Let's hope Purdue has a few losses so ABC doesn't make this a 7:30 game. We know West Lafayette and Ohio State do not mix. We would love to see a noon game, maybe the big noon game or something like that for Purdue there. We don't want to see a night game with Purdue. After the Purdue game, Penn State by the way, I think Ohio State beats Purdue fairly easily. You know, it's kind of like that revenge thing to where Ohio State faced Iowa and just annihilated them after getting crushed. I think a similar thing's going to happen with Purdue, but it is a hard place for Ohio State to play. I do respect Purdue. They're just not talented enough. Then you've got Penn State, which is an absolute heavy hitter. Penn State's going to be great. They're breaking in a young quarterback, but they're breaking in a superstar quarterback. They've got a really good young running back. They have a really good pass rusher. They've got a really good offensive tackle, probably the best offensive tackle in college football, who would have been a top 10 pick this year if he would have declared. Yeah, Penn State's a juggernaut, and it's very important Ohio State gets them at home, and you want this game preferably 7:30 on ABC. You do not want this game to be big noon. Anything but big noon for the Penn State game. I would say Ohio State is favorites for sure because they're at home, but I've been on record and I say Penn State went 0-2 last year against Michigan and Ohio State. This year they're going to go 1-1. I think they beat one of Ohio State or Michigan this year, but I would favorite Ohio State at home against Penn State. But I mean, we do have to understand Penn State's going to beat Ohio State at some point. I mean, every year it's like the same thing where Penn State surprisingly plays Ohio State really close. I mean, last year was a complete jump scare when you look at that game going into the fourth quarter. Ohio State not able to move the ball. They were losing, and they kind of got lucky that Sean Clifford he's just not that talented, let's be honest, and they end up winning it. JTT takes over the game, has a generational defensive performance, and they kind of have a 28-point avalanche in the fourth quarter. Is that something that can be done again? If you're Ohio State, you just hope one more year, let's get the playoff expanded to a 12 team, then you can lose to Penn State and still very easily make the playoff when it gets expanded to 12 teams. After Penn State, this is where the schedule gets really tough. It's at Purdue versus Penn State, at Wisconsin. That is brutal. You want to avoid a night game. This has got to be a big noon game. We want to see a big noon. Give me big noon. I do not want a 7:30 game at Wisconsin. No, thank you. And Wisconsin, I've said they will have a bounce back season. They will go to the Big Ten championship. There's no one that's as talented as them in the Big Ten West. Luke Fickell is a better coach than all those other teams. Wisconsin's going to be really good next year, and this could be a game. This is a top 10 matchup possibly. And this is a game after Ohio State has to put all of their energy in beating Penn State. This game has upset written all over it, and it's sad too, because that is not a good schedule. You do not want to go on the road at Wisconsin after Penn State. And I'm warning people, Wisconsin at home is not going to be fun this next year. With Luke Fickell, they're not going to be fun. After the Wisconsin game, you get a very easy Rutgers team on the road. That'll be an easy win, I'm sure. Michigan State at home. Michigan State kind of, they're hard to judge because they did make a New Year's Six Bowl 2 years ago and they were terrible last year. But there's a massive talent gap between Ohio State and Michigan State, especially Ohio State at home. That should be a fairly easy game. I would expect Ohio State around 20-point favorites in that game. Minnesota at home. Yeah, Minnesota's probably going to be pretty bad. They lose their running back. They lose Tanner Morgan. I would expect a fairly easy win for Ohio State at home. And then gearing up for the final game, of course, very important for Ryan Day not to fall to 1-3 against Michigan. That game on the road, and we did get an early line in that game. Michigan, 1-point favorites. That is the preseason line right now over Ohio State. Ohio State has the talent advantage, but Michigan has J.J. McCarthy, who's now got experience. Blake Corum returning, Donovan Edwards returning. That is going to be a very tough game for Ohio State, and that is a statement game in Ryan Day's career. Any means necessary, he has to win that game at Michigan to avoid falling to 1-3 in his career. I know people say, Ryan Day's really not 1-2 because of the 2020 sham pandemic. Guys, you're preaching to the choir, but it is what it is. Ohio State was 30-point favorites against Michigan in 2020. It was a record, and then Michigan completely ducked the game because you didn't have to face any penalty for canceling games that year, if you remember. And then Michigan fans create the false equivalency and say, oh, but Ohio State ducked Illinois. You have to understand, Ohio State never missed back-to-back games that year due to the pandemic. Michigan basically canceled their entire season. It was a total sham. They missed like 4 straight games because their team sucked and they were 2-4. Guys, you're preaching to the choir, but it is technically true. Ryan Day is 1-2 against Michigan, and if he loses, he will fall to 1-3. We do have to understand that was a sham pandemic game where Ohio State would have annihilated Michigan and probably forced Jim Harbaugh back to the NFL or into retirement. And that's just the reality of that. But guys, let's get to the actual team makeup. The quarterback, we saw Kyle McCord last year. A lot of fans very frustrated with Ryan Day's usage of McCord. He really didn't give him much of a chance to throw. McCord ends up with just 20 pass attempts on the season, and Devin Brown did not have a single pass attempt. So both of these guys, we know Kyle McCord played and started an early game as a true freshman against Akron, I believe. So not too much of a competitive standpoint there, but at least McCord has some experience. It is McCord versus Devin Brown. May the best man win. If Devin Brown wins, Ohio State is going to have problems when it comes to the overall depth at the QB position because McCord's immediately going to transfer. So there is that. Looking at the running backs, Ohio State getting back Mayan Williams, getting back Trevion Henderson, and then after that, we will see because you have a situation with Evan Pryor where I probably would be putting him on transfer watch right now. It just feels like you've got Dalton Hayden, who played really well as a true freshman. Evan Pryor is someone coming off injury. He's already behind Mayan Williams and Trevion on the depth chart. He wants to play, so I could see a situation where Evan Pryor says, you know what, I'm 3rd or 4th string. I'm coming off an injury. I want to play. I'm going to utilize that transfer portal window in May and transfer out. That's just my speculation. I don't know if it's going to happen, but, I think Trevion Henderson's going to be great. I don't know why they were playing him. He was clearly injured. He was literally limping against Maryland, averaging 1.5 yards per carry. It's just complete coaching malpractice. He was injured. Why are you playing a running back who's injured? He can barely move. But I guess they just really didn't trust Dalton Hayden, and we kind of saw that in the Michigan game. Dalton Hayden was healthy; he barely played, and then also you have Xavier Johnson, who is someone I love. Xavier Johnson completely embarrassed Georgia. That was amazing seeing that. But yeah, Xavier Johnson's kind of a mix between, but he's mainly a receiver. I'll say I want Xavier Johnson to be the punt returner. I know he doesn't have great speed, but he's really reliable. and all I care about on punt returns is just not fumbling. So we'll see what happens there. But that is the running back situation. Taking a look at the receivers, you've got Harrison Jr. returning, you've got Ibuka returning, you've got Fleming more than likely returning, Cade Stover is returning. Basically, all those guys outside of JSN will be back. I know there's been, kind of speculation. Will G. Scott Jr. transfer? Will, maybe Julian Fleming transfer? Right now, it seems like those guys are coming back, so that is a loaded wide receiver room. Of course, Marvin Harrison Jr., the best receiver in football, a top 5 player in college football. Ibuka currently being mocked in the first round as well in early 2024 mock drafts. Cade Stover, he needs to work on his hands. I mean, that's the one thing with tight ends. You got to catch the ball, man. Cade Stover was dropping passes against Michigan, and if you're a tight end, we can't have that. You got to be a security blanket for a young quarterback. So the receiver room is completely loaded right now, and there's a bunch more true freshmen coming in who I don't think are going to get a lot of playing time because of how loaded it is, but I do know there are some really good true freshmen coming in. Taking a look at the defense, you do have Tommy Eichenberg back. You've got Steele Chambers back. Denzel Burke is back. Zach Harrison is gone. Cody Simon is back. JTT is back. Jack Sawyer is back. Williams is back. Josh Proctor is back. Michael Hall is back. Javante Baptiste, I think, is transferring to Notre Dame. So the one thing when it comes to the defense, I want more of an emphasis on getting sacks. So I would love to see JTT with 10 sacks. I would love to see Michael Hall with 7 or 8 sacks. I would love to see Jack Sawyer with 7 or 8 sacks. Those guys need to break out. And the big thing for Ohio State, I want to see Sonny Styles playing 100% of the time. I want to see CJ Hicks playing 80 to 90% of the time. Denzel Burke, you need a huge bounce back year from Denzel Burke for sure. But this defense, in terms of overall talent, is absolutely loaded. Not a question. They have like 7 5-stars on this defense. All of the 2021 record-breaking class, they're all juniors now. So you need an absolute star-studded, minimum top 10 defense in college football, but maybe even a top 5 defense in terms of that. So we will see there. And then just taking a look at some of this was the class of, the class of 2022. So these guys are going to be going into their second year. You've got CJ Hicks, Sonny Styles, Devin Brown, 2 pass rushers, Jackson and Abar, and then the receivers, there is some concern that the receivers are getting passed by. We will see. Out of these guys, I'm really excited for CJ Hicks and Sonny Styles. Sonny Styles reclassified. He probably would have been a top 3 player in the country if he would have stayed in the class of 2023. He reclassifies and becomes the number 12 overall player. And then these guys are all going to be true freshmen. So I know Brandon Inniss is going to be a phenomenal possession receiver. And you do have some cornerbacks there as well. But I really wouldn't expect a ton of true freshmen to make much of an impact because it's so hard for both receivers and cornerbacks, but especially cornerbacks, to make an impact as a true freshman. Their bodies are just not ready for the physicalness. They need a year to put on muscle. And Ohio State did do decently well in terms of the transfer portal when looking at it overall. They were able to get a safety who can kind of be a rover, who's got a 93 overall rating in the portal, and then the cornerback who was really sought after, who people were offering money left and right. He's possibly going to be a starting quarterback from Ole Miss, ranked as a 94 overall in the portal. So they did a good job in terms of the secondary. The biggest concern for Ohio State, I don't think there's any question. It is the new offensive line paired with an inexperienced quarterback. That is the biggest concern for Ohio State going into 2023. You're going to have 2 new starting tackles. I think Josh Fryer is going to be great, but I have big questions about that right tackle spot. You're getting a new center. There's a lot of moving parts, and then a young, inexperienced quarterback. And for Ohio State, the schedule breakdown, it's going to come down to that game at Notre Dame versus Penn State, at Wisconsin, at Michigan. So 3 out of the top 4 of your hardest games are on the road. That is tough, and that's what Ohio State's season is going to come down to, in my opinion. But that is the official preview for Ohio State football in the year 2023. Guys, make sure you follow me on Twitter. Link to that's always in the description. I'm, of course, the Depressed Ginger. Thank you for watching.